in the heart of Seoul's most exclusive district, where the neon glow of the city fades into tree-lined avenues and iron gates stretch toward the sky, lies a fortress of wealth and silence. The Kong estate is not a home. It is a monument to power. Marble floors that reflect no warmth, chandeliers that cast cold light, and walls that have heard more tears than laughter. Behind those gates, a different kind of war was being waged. A war of tears. And at the center of it all sat a young man who had never known what it meant to lose. His name was Min Ho Kong, the prince of the underworld, the only son of Chairman Kong, the most feared mob boss in all of Korea. His father controlled the shadows of Seoul, the gambling dens, the nightclubs, the backroom deals that moved millions. But inside this mansion, Min Ho was the true ruler, and he was a nightmare. From the outside, Min Ho was everything a father could want. Handsome, sharp-eyed, impeccably dressed in Italian suits that cost more than most people's cars. He had the kind of face that made women turn twice and men look away. But those who worked for him knew the truth behind the polished exterior. He was spoiled beyond redemption, cruelly bored, and utterly devoid of empathy. To him, the staff were not people. They were furniture. They were shadows that moved through the halls, existing only to serve and never to be seen. His father ruled the streets with an iron fist, but Min Ho ruled this house with a reign of quiet terror. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to strike anyone. He had perfected the art of breaking people with words, with silence, with the simple, crushing weight of his disapproval. He made every single maid cry. Not all at once, but one by one, systematically, like a collector checking off a list. Some he broke with endless, impossible demands. Others he destroyed with cold indifference, treating them as though they were invisible, as though their existence was an inconvenience he tolerated. He would move their belongings in the night, hide their personal photos, criticize their work in that icy, clinical tone that made them feel smaller than dust. He watched them crumble, and he felt nothing. He was a monster in a tailored suit, and he had long ago forgotten what it felt like to be human. Then, one rainy afternoon in late autumn, a new maid arrived at the mansion. Her name was Yuki. She was small and frail, with dark circles under her eyes and a quietness that seemed to come from exhaustion rather than shyness. She carried a single worn suitcase and clutched a faded photograph of her mother. She had come to the mansion for one reason only: desperation. Her mother was dying. The medical bills had piled up like a mountain she could never climb. She had no father, no brothers, no one to turn to. This job was her last hope. She was terrified, but she had no choice. Fear was a luxury she could not afford. The other maids saw her arrive through the rain-smeared windows, and their hearts sank. They had seen this before. Fresh faces, hopeful eyes, the belief that they could survive if they just worked hard enough and stayed out of his way. They knew better. They gathered around her in the staff quarters, their voices low and urgent. They whispered warnings like prayers. Don't look him in the eye. Don't ever be alone with him. If he asks you a question, answer quickly, and keep your head down. If he gets bored, he will destroy you. They told her about the ones who had come before, the ones who had left in tears, the ones who had quit without even collecting their pay. Yuki listened, her hands trembling, but she nodded. She had nowhere else to go. She tried to be invisible. She moved through the halls like a ghost, cleaning, polishing, dusting, always keeping her eyes lowered. But Min Ho had already spotted her. He had a sixth sense for new prey. He noticed the way she flinched when a door closed too loudly. He noticed the way she hurried past to study, her footsteps quick and light, as though she hoped he wouldn't hear her. He noticed everything. And he smiled that cold, cruel smile. A new game had begun. He started with small things. A vase moved from its usual spot, a drawer left slightly open, a book placed on the wrong shelf. He never accused her directly. He simply let her find the evidence of her failures, let her wonder if she was losing her mind. The psychological torment was exquisite. He watched her grow more anxious with each passing day, her movements more hesitant, her eyes more desperate. He fed on her fear like a vampire feeding on blood. But it was the coffee that finally broke her. One morning, he summoned her to his private study. The room was vast, lined with leather-bound books he had never read and awards his father had never earned. He sat behind a massive oak desk, his eyes fixed on his laptop screen, not bothering to look up when she entered. She placed the tray on the corner of the desk, her hands shaking so badly the china rattled. He picked up the cup, took a single sip, and then he did something that made her heart stop. He spit it back into the cup. "It's cold," he said, his voice like shards of ice. She apologized, her voice barely a whisper, and rushed to make another. Too bitter. She made another. Too sweet. Another. Lukewarm. Another. With each rejection, Yuki's hands trembled more violently. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she fought them back. She had promised herself she would not cry. She would not give him that satisfaction. But Min-ho watched her, utterly still, his eyes gleaming with amusement. He wasn't thirsty. He was playing. He was a cat and she was the mouse, and the game was the only thing that made him feel alive. On the 5th day, he summoned her again. This time, he was seated in his leather chair, and the room was dim. The rain had not stopped for hours. He didn't look at her when she entered. He just waved his hand, a casual, dismissive gesture that knocked a stack of papers to the floor. "Pick them up," he ordered. She knelt down, her fingers brushing against the cold marble, gathering the scattered pages. She was so focused on her task that she didn't hear him stand up. She didn't see him approach. He moved slowly, deliberately. He wanted to see her reaction. He wanted to feel her fear radiate off her skin like heat. He pretended to stretch, raising his arms above his head, and then he stumbled. Or maybe he didn't stumble. Maybe he pushed. It didn't matter. The result was the same. He knocked into her, sending her sprawling forward. Her hand shot out to catch herself, and in that desperate, panicked movement, she knocked a heavy brass letter opener off his desk. It clattered to the floor with a sound that echoed through the silent room. She was uninjured, but the shock was like a bolt of lightning through her body. A sharp, involuntary yelp escaped her lips. It was not a scream of pain. It was a cry of pure, unfiltered shock. The sound hung in the air between them, raw and human, and for a moment, Min-ho froze. He had heard maids cry before. He had heard them sob, beg, and plead. But he had never heard a sound like this. This was not submission. This was something else. And then it happened. Yuki was on her hands and knees, surrounded by scattered papers. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She slowly lifted her head, and her eyes met his. And in those eyes, Min-ho saw something that shattered him to his core. He expected tears. He expected terror. He expected the same broken, defeated look he had seen in so many others. But instead, he saw pity. Pure, burning, undeniable pity. She looked at him as though she were looking through him, past the expensive suit and the cold eyes and the cruel smirk, straight into the hollow emptiness inside. She whispered, so quietly he almost didn't hear it, "You're the most broken person I have ever met." The words landed like a physical blow. Min-ho felt something he had never felt before, an icy hot shard of shame piercing his chest. His breath caught in his throat. His carefully constructed mask of cruelty cracked. For the first time in his life, he had no response.
No cutting remark.
No cold dismissal. He just stood there, utterly stunned, as though someone had reached into his chest and ripped out his heart. She didn't wait for his reply. She gathered the remaining papers, placed them neatly on his desk, and walked out of the room without looking back. And Min-ho, the prince of the underworld, the monster in a tailored suit, stood frozen in the dim light of his study, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to breathe. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in his enormous bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over. "You are the most broken person I have ever met." The words haunted him. They echoed in his mind like a curse he couldn't break. He got up and walked to the mirror. He looked at his reflection for the first time in years. Not at the handsome face, not at the expensive clothes, but into his own eyes. And what he saw terrified him. He saw the emptiness, the cruelty, the boy who had never been loved, only feared. His father was a monster who had taught him that strength was cruelty and weakness was death. His mother had left when he was 7, and no one had ever told him that love was even possible. He had built walls around his heart so thick that no one could reach him. But Yuki had seen through them. She had seen the truth. And the truth was unbearable. The next morning, everything changed. Min-ho walked through the halls of his mansion, and for the first time, he saw the staff. Not as furniture, not as shadows, but as human beings. He saw the worn-out shoes of the kitchen maids, the tired eyes of the housekeepers, the silent tears that some of them wiped away when they thought no one was looking. He saw a maid struggling with a heavy box, her arms straining under the weight. He almost walked past her. That was what the old Min-ho would have done. But her words echoed in his head. "You are the most broken person I have ever met." He stopped. He walked over to the maid and took the box from her hands. He carried it to the storage room without saying a word. He set it down and walked away. The maid stared after him, her mouth agape. She had never seen him lift a finger for anyone. That afternoon, he found Yuki in the study. She was dusting the bookshelves, her back to him. She flinched when she heard his footsteps, and he noticed the way her shoulders tensed. She expected another game. She expected more cruelty. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, looking at the floor. He cleared his throat. The words were rusty, foreign to his tongue. "How is your mother?" he asked. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with confusion and suspicion. She didn't answer. She just stared at him, her expression guarded. "What is this?" she seemed to say. "Is this a new game?" "I can help," he said quickly, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "The medical bills. I can pay them." Her eyes widened. She shook her head, her voice trembling. "This is a trick. This is just a new way to break me." And for the first time, Min-ho's voice broke. "I'm not trying to break you," he said, his voice raw and desperate. "I want to be better. I don't know how. I've never been anything else. But I want to try. Please." There was a long silence. Yuki studied his face, searching for the lie, the trap, the hidden cruelty. But all she saw was a young man who looked utterly lost. She didn't trust him. Not yet. But she nodded slowly. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something human behind his cold eyes. He kept his word. He paid for her mother's treatment, arranging for the best doctors, the best care. He started paying all the maids double their wages. He stopped the cruel games, the impossible demands, the psychological warfare. He spoke to them with respect, with an awkward, clumsy kindness that seemed foreign to him. Some of the staff whispered that it was a trick, that he was planning something worse. But weeks passed, and the kindness remained. The real battle, however, was outside the walls of the mansion. His father, the chairman, was enraged by this perceived weakness. He summoned Min-ho to his private office, a dark room filled with the smell of expensive cigars and old money. The chairman was a large man with cold eyes and a voice like gravel. "A Kong does not apologize," he roared, slamming his fist on the desk. "A Kong does not show mercy. You are making us a laughingstock. You are throwing away everything I built." Min-ho stood his ground. He looked his father in the eye and said, "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm building something new. Something that isn't built on fear. Something that lasts." The chairman laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Fear is all that lasts," he spat. "Fear is the only thing that keeps people in line. You think kindness makes you strong? It makes you weak. It makes you prey." "Maybe," Min-ho replied, "but I'd rather be prey than a monster." He walked out of the room, and he didn't look back. He was no longer the monster his father wanted him to be. He was becoming a man. Months passed. The mansion slowly transformed. The cold marble walls seemed a little warmer. The staff smiled more often. Laughter echoed in the hallways for the first time in years. And Min-ho, the former prince of cruelty, found himself looking forward to the small moments. The quiet nods of thanks from the maids. The warmth of a freshly brewed cup of tea. The simple act of being kind. But all things must end. Yuki's mother had recovered, and Yuki had saved enough money to leave. She had planned to stay only until her mother was well, and now the time had come. She packed her worn suitcase, her few belongings, and prepared to say goodbye. As she walked through the halls one last time, she felt a strange ache in her chest. She had come here broken and afraid. She was leaving with something she hadn't expected. Hope. Min-ho found her in her small quarters. He stood in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "You're leaving?" he asked, his voice heavy with disappointment. "It's time," she said gently. You don't need me here anymore. The house, it feels different now. You made it different. He nodded slowly. He wanted to tell her so many things. He wanted to tell her that she was the only person who had ever seen him, the only one who had ever shown him what a real human being looked like. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he asked, "Why didn't you run that day? Why didn't you scream? Why didn't you quit?" Yuki smiled. It was the first time she had truly smiled at him. It was a warm, radiant smile that lit up her tired face.
"Because I saw you," she replied.
"Not your money. Not your father's power.
Just you.
And I knew you weren't a bad person. You were just lost. Everyone gets lost sometimes. The only thing that matters is finding your way back." She reached out and placed her hand on his cheek. It was a gentle, fleeting touch, but it meant more to him than any gift he had ever received. "Be kind to yourself," she whispered. "And be kind to others. That's all that matters." Then she picked up her suitcase and walked out the door. Min-ho watched her disappear down the long driveway, through the iron gates, and into the city beyond. He stood there for a long time, the rain soaking his expensive suit, watching the spot where she had vanished. The cruel prince of the underworld was gone. In his place stood a man burdened with the past, but looking toward a future he had never dared to imagine. He had made every maid cry, but it was the one maid he hurt, the one who saw through his cruelty and into his soul, who changed him forever. Some people are touched by power.
Some are broken by it.
But every once in a while, someone is saved by a single moment of truth. Yuki came to the mansion for money. She left with something more valuable. The knowledge that even in the darkest heart, there is a flicker of light waiting to be found. And Min-ho, for the first time in his life, was finally free. He walked back into the mansion, not as a prince of shadows, but as a man who had learned that true strength lies not in making others cry, but in lifting them up. He looked around at the marble walls and the chandeliers, and for the first time, they didn't feel like a fortress. They felt like a home. And somewhere in the city, Yuki walked into the rain with a smile on her face, knowing that she had left behind a legacy more powerful than any fortune, a changed heart. The Korean Mafia boss's son made every maid cry, until the black maid he hurt changed him forever.